The story begins in a remote western town, tucked between rolling hills and arid plains, where the sun beats down mercilessly during the day and the wind cuts like a knife at night. Life here is hard, demanding endurance and grit from every soul who dares to settle. For most townsfolk, the frontier is a place of survival, where alliances are fragile and prejudices run deep. Among the town's inhabitants, a rigid social order is enforced silently but relentlessly, and any deviation from accepted norms invites suspicion or hostility. In this harsh landscape, appearances and heritage carry more weight than character, and those who are different are often cast aside or treated with cruelty. Amid this unforgiving environment lives a young girl of mixed heritage, half Apache and half European settler. Her existence is marked by a delicate balance between two worlds, neither of which fully accepts her. In the eyes of the townspeople, she is a half-blood, an insult that diminishes her identity to a single stigmatized word. The label follows her like a shadow. Children jeer at her from the dirt streets, adults glare with suspicion, and even casual passers-by cross to the other side rather than acknowledge her presence. Despite this, the girl carries herself with quiet dignity, her eyes reflecting a mixture of cautious intelligence and the deep wariness of someone who has grown accustomed to prejudice. Her daily life is a constant negotiation with hostility. She scavenges for food and water, trades small favors for necessities, and keeps to the outskirts of town where the eyes of the judgmental are less frequent. The frontier is a place of both danger and opportunity, and she has learned to move swiftly and silently, avoiding confrontation whenever possible. Yet, even in her solitude, she is never truly free from the gaze of those who would judge her for her heritage. Every glance, every whispered remark carries the weight of centuries-old biases, and the young girl bears these burdens silently, internalizing the injustice around her. Despite the cruelty of the townsfolk, the girl possesses resilience that has been honed through hardship. She knows the ways of the land, the patterns of animals, the rhythm of the wind, the hidden sources of water that sustain life in such a harsh environment. This knowledge becomes her armor, a quiet strength that allows her to navigate the frontier with a sense of self-reliance. Yet, she is not hardened beyond empathy. Her heart remains tender, and she dreams of a world where she might be seen for who she truly is, rather than the prejudices imposed upon her. The tension between the girl and the town is established through subtle, everyday interactions. A shopkeeper refuses her service, citing town rules. Children avoid her playground, calling her names behind her back. Men in the saloon mutter under their breaths about the trouble a half-blood might bring. These small acts of exclusion accumulate into a pervasive atmosphere of hostility, shaping the girl's sense of caution and mistrust. Yet, they also highlight her quiet courage, for she endures without complaint, learning the intricate dance of survival in a place that offers little kindness to the vulnerable. This opening section sets the emotional and thematic stage for the story. It introduces the reader to the raw, unforgiving world of the western frontier, the societal prejudices that shape life there, and the young girl's courage and resilience in the face of relentless adversity. Her character embodies the central conflict of the narrative, the struggle to maintain dignity and hope amid cruelty and injustice. It prepares the audience for the harrowing events to come, while also planting the seeds of empathy for the girl, whose humanity shines through the shadows cast by a prejudiced society. The tension that had simmered in the town for years finally boiled over one late afternoon, when the young girl, weary from scavenging and hiding, inadvertently drew the wrong kind of attention. She had been gathering water from a small, hidden creek just beyond the edge of town, careful to avoid the townsfolk who considered her presence a provocation. But fate or perhaps malice intervened. A group of men, fueled by long-standing prejudice and a desire to assert dominance, spotted her. Their eyes narrowed with suspicion, their mouths twisted with a cruel smirk that promised nothing but harm. What followed was swift and merciless. They accused her of petty theft, a crime she had not committed, and declared that she must be punished, both for the alleged offense and for her impure heritage. In the eyes of the townspeople, justice and vengeance were often one and the same, and morality was weighed against prejudice rather than truth. The girl's protests fell on deaf ears. Her voice, frail but filled with desperation, begged for reason. "I didn't take anything. Please, I'm just trying to survive." But the men were deaf to words and blinded by bias. Dragged through the dirt streets, the girl felt the weight of every hostile glance. Women covered their mouths in feigned shock, children hid behind skirts, and men's whispers of approval stung like lashes. There was no mercy, only the spectacle of cruelty, a warning to anyone who dared defy the rigid social order. The outskirts of town, usually a refuge, became the stage for an unthinkable act of violence. The men forced her to a sturdy oak tree near the road, its thick branches reaching skyward as if to offer a silent witness to the injustice. With rough hands, they tied a rope around her waist, hoisting her from the ground. The girl's heart pounded violently, fear mixing with disbelief. The townsfolk watched silently, some cheering, some turning away in shame, others simply indifferent. They left a sign pinned to the tree beside her, scrawled in crude letters, "White man don't forgive." It was not just a threat, it was a declaration, an attempt to brand her identity as unacceptable, a punishment not for any crime but for the blood she carried in her veins. As the girl hung there, suspended between earth and sky, her mind raced. Memories of her mother, whispers of Apache legends, and moments of fleeting kindness all collided in her thoughts. Her body trembled from pain and fear, yet beneath it all burned a quiet defiance. She would not beg for pity from those who had no right to wield it. In her eyes, a spark of life remained fragile, yes, but unbroken. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ground. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying with it a faint promise of change. And in that suspended moment, the girl's entire existence, the constant struggle, the isolation, the fear was laid bare. She became more than a victim. She became a symbol of resilience, a living testament to the cruelty inflicted upon those the world rejects, yet refuses to erase. This harrowing scene not only establishes the severity of the townsfolk's cruelty, but also emphasizes the girl's vulnerability and inner strength. It sets the stage for the arrival of the rancher, whose timely intervention will shatter the cycle of prejudice and violence. The emotional intensity of this moment ensures that readers are fully invested in her fate, rooting for her survival and seeking justice in a world that so often denies it. The tree, the rope, and the scrawled sign become enduring symbols of both the town's hatred and the girl's courage. It is a moment of ultimate peril that underscores the central conflict of the story, the confrontation between bigotry and humanity, cruelty and compassion, isolation, and the possibility of protection. The stakes have never been higher, and the reader is left holding their breath, waiting for salvation to arrive. The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the rolling hills as the rancher rode along a winding dirt trail, checking on the cattle grazing near the edge of his property. He was a solitary man, known to most as quiet, strong, and fair-minded, a figure shaped by the harsh demands of frontier life. Years of living alone had taught him self-reliance, patience, and the hard truth that justice often required more than words. His eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the horizon as he guided his horse along the trail, sensing the subtle shifts in the landscape, the lowing of cattle, the distant cry of birds, and the faint rustle of wind through the trees. It was then that he noticed a disturbing sight at the edge of town, a figure suspended from a tree, a rope cutting into her small frame, her body trembling with fear. A crude sign, its letters jagged and hateful, hung beside her. "White man don't forgive." The rancher's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as anger and concern mingled in equal measure. Something deep within him stirred not just a sense of justice, but a personal resolve to intervene. He had encountered cruelty before, but there was something about the helplessness of this young girl, suspended like a puppet for all to see, that ignited an unshakable determination. The townsfolk nearby seemed frozen in their complicity, some daring not to look directly, others smirking with satisfaction. The rancher, however, did not hesitate. He rode closer, his horse's hooves thudding steadily against the hard-packed earth, each step deliberate and confident. The murmurs of the onlookers grew quieter as they sensed the presence of a man who commanded respect. The rancher dismounted, his boots crunching against the gravel, and surveyed the scene with a calm but piercing gaze. He could see the girl's eyes, wide with terror, and the panic etched into her features. Her chest heaved as she struggled against the rope, each movement a desperate attempt to survive. Without a word, the rancher approached the tree. His hands were steady as he examined the rope and the knots, his mind calculating the safest way to lower her without causing further harm. Every movement was precise, every second counted. The crowd held its breath, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. With a quick, practiced motion, he cut the rope, letting the girl drop gently into his arms. She clung to him instinctively, fear and relief mingling in her tear-streaked face. For a long moment, there was silence. The townsfolk exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. The rancher stood firm, his presence a protective shield between the girl and those who would do her harm. His eyes met hers, conveying a promise without words. She was safe now. In that instant, the girl realized that not all men were cruel. Some were capable of courage and compassion. Her heart, battered by years of prejudice, felt a flicker of hope she had long believed impossible. The rancher spoke, his voice calm but commanding. "You're under my protection now. No one is going to hurt you while I'm around." There was no boast, no grand gesture, just a simple, unshakable declaration. The girl, still trembling, nodded faintly, beginning to understand that this man was different from the others who had treated her with suspicion or disdain. Here was someone willing to stand against injustice, even when it meant defying the town itself. As he guided her away from the tree and the hostile crowd, the rancher's mind raced. He knew this act of defiance might provoke retaliation, but he also understood that doing nothing was not an option. The girl's life and her very identity demanded protection. With each step toward the safety of his ranch, he reinforced an unspoken truth. Courage and morality sometimes required risk, but they were the only way to preserve humanity in a world too often ruled by prejudice. This moment marked the beginning of a pivotal relationship. The rancher's arrival was more than a rescue. It was a turning point. It introduced a figure of hope and strength, someone who could challenge the cruelty of the frontier while nurturing the girl's fragile sense of self-worth. In his calm determination and unwavering moral compass, the reader sees the embodiment of justice, setting the stage for the bond that will grow between protector and protected. The moment the rancher reached the base of the tree, time seemed to slow. The girl, suspended by the coarse rope, hung there like a fragile bird trapped in a cage, her small body swaying slightly in the breeze. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt and tears, and her wide eyes reflected a mixture of fear, confusion, and hope. The townsfolk, still lingering nearby, murmured in unease, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. They had expected a silent punishment, not the appearance of a man willing to defy their cruelty. The rancher didn't hesitate. He approached the tree with calm precision, his movements deliberate and measured. Years of working with cattle and handling the unpredictable dangers of the frontier had taught him steadiness under pressure. He inspected the knot securing the rope around the girl's waist, noting the way it cut into her skin. His heart ached for the girl, but he knew panicking or rushing would only increase the risk of injury. He drew a sharp knife from his belt, its blade catching the fading sunlight, and began to carefully cut the rope. As the rope loosened, the girl's body shuddered violently, a reflex born from fear and exhaustion. The rancher's strong hands were there to catch her, supporting her weight as she slid down. For a tense moment, it seemed as though she might slip or falter, but the rancher's grip was firm, steady, and unyielding. Slowly, she landed on solid ground, knees buckling slightly as the relief of being free washed over her. She clung instinctively to him, her trembling hands gripping his coat, seeking the warmth and safety he represented. The rancher knelt beside her, checking quickly for injuries. "You're safe now," he said quietly, his voice gentle yet authoritative. "I won't let anyone hurt you." The girl's chest heaved as she tried to process the sudden shift from terror to protection. Her mind was still reeling from the cruel spectacle of the town's hatred. But this man, this stranger, offered a calm, unwavering reassurance she had never known. She had learned to expect cruelty, yet here was someone willing to risk defiance on her behalf. The townsfolk remained at a cautious distance, murmuring amongst themselves. Some avoided eye contact, aware that the rancher's reputation for courage and fairness made them hesitate. Others scowled, anger simmering at the defiance they witnessed. But none dared to step closer. In the face of this quiet, steadfast authority, the girl's persecutors were powerless, their cruelty exposed as mere posturing against someone willing to act on principle. The rancher gently guided her away from the tree and toward the cover of nearby brush, shielding her from the crowd. Every step was careful, protective, as though he were shepherding something precious through a dangerous landscape. The girl, still trembling, clung to his side, gradually relaxing as the immediate threat of harm faded. The sense of safety he provided was profound, and though her trust was tentative, it was growing. For the first time in her young life, someone had intervened purely out of care, without expectation or prejudice. Once they were a safe distance from the town, the rancher offered her water from his canteen, and she drank greedily, the liquid restoring a small measure of strength. He wiped dirt and rope marks from her face and hands, simple acts of kindness that spoke louder than words. The girl's gratitude was silent but deep, a fragile trust beginning to bloom in her heart. In this moment she realized that not all men were cruel, and that the world could contain those who acted with courage, compassion, and integrity. This rescue marked more than the physical liberation from the rope. It was the first step toward emotional healing and trust. It established the rancher as her protector, a figure who would challenge injustice and offer her the security she had been denied. The girl, for her part, began to recognize that she could survive, even thrive, under someone's care, and that strength could be found in connection rather than isolation. By the time they moved further from the tree and into the safety of the rancher's territory, the oppressive tension of the town began to fade. The rescue was complete, yet the emotional resonance lingered. A young girl, saved from cruelty, discovering the first glimmer of hope and trust in a world that had long rejected her. This moment of tension, courage, and compassion sets the stage for their developing bond, one that will grow deeper in the days and trials to come. Once they reached the shelter of the rancher's modest cabin, perched on a rise overlooking the wide expanse of his land, the girl finally allowed herself to take a deep breath. The shadows of the afternoon stretched long across the dusty ground, and the warmth of the sun slowly faded, replaced by the cool embrace of evening. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was away from prying eyes, away from the hostile town, and away from the terror that had haunted her daily life. The rancher helped her inside, his movements calm and deliberate, careful not to startle her further. The cabin was simple. a rough-hewn wooden structure with a small hearth, a few handmade chairs, and shelves stocked with necessities. There was no grand display of wealth or comfort, just a space built for survival and quiet life. Yet, to the girl, it felt like a fortress, a place where danger could not touch her, if only for a few hours. He offered her a blanket, which she accepted hesitantly, wrapping it around herself like a shield. She perched on the edge of a wooden chair, knees drawn up, staring down at the floor. Her hands, still rough and calloused from labor and the rope spite, fidgeted nervously. The rancher did not press her to speak, knowing that trust could not be forced. Instead, he began tending to the small fire, the crackle and warmth a subtle reassurance that danger had been left behind, at least for now. "You're safe here," he said quietly, his voice steady and low. "I won't let anyone hurt you. Not while I'm around." It was a simple promise, but in it lay a weighty assurance, a vow that someone, for the first time, truly saw her as human, deserving of protection, not as a symbol of shame or prejudice. The girl's eyes flicked up at him, wide and wary, trying to measure whether his words were trustworthy. They seemed so unlike the voices of the town, calm, gentle, and firm all at once. Slowly, she began to respond. A faint nod, a hesitant glance toward him, small signs that trust might be possible. The rancher offered her a cup of water, holding it with both hands as though it were a fragile treasure. She took it, her fingers brushing against his, and the physical contact, though slight, carried a reassurance that words could not. It was the first real touch of kindness she had known in weeks, perhaps months. She drank slowly, the cool liquid easing the tension in her body, and for a brief moment allowed herself to relax. The rancher then retrieved a simple cloth and cleaned the abrasions on her arms, the rope burns tenderly treated. The girl winced occasionally, but she did not pull away. Each careful gesture, each act of attention, reinforced the idea that he would not hurt her, would not abandon her, would not judge her for who she was. It was a new kind of interaction for her, one built on respect and care rather than fear or disdain. They sat together in quiet for a long time, neither rushing the other. The girl began to speak in halting sentences, telling him small fragments of her life, where she had lived, who she had known, the constant fear of being cast out. The rancher listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, offering gentle words that encouraged her to continue. For the first time, she realized that her story mattered, that her voice could exist without consequence of ridicule or punishment. By the end of that evening, the first threads of trust had been woven. The girl, still cautious, felt a glimmer of hope. She understood that she was no longer entirely alone, and that someone had chosen to stand beside her in a world that had long rejected her. The rancher, for his part, recognized her bravery, the quiet strength she had carried despite constant adversity, and he vowed silently to protect her as fiercely as he would his own life. This moment marked the beginning of a profound bond, one not of possession but of mutual reliance and understanding. It was a bond that would grow as days passed, a foundation of trust that would allow both the girl and the rancher to confront the challenges ahead. In this quiet cabin, amid warmth and the scent of burning wood, the seeds of hope and security were planted, seeds that would carry them through the trials of the frontier and the prejudices that still lurked beyond the safety of their refuge. Though the girl had found temporary safety at the rancher's cabin, the shadow of the town's hostility lingered like a storm on the horizon. Word had traveled fast. The young girl had been rescued from the rope, and the man who had dared defy the townsfolk as cruelty was none other than the solitary rancher. Whispers of outrage, anger, and wounded pride began circulating, carried from saloon to general store, from street corners to dusty alleys. A few of the more aggressive men convened in the dim back room of the saloon. Their voices were low but fervent, laden with venom. "He can't get away with it," one spat, slamming a fist onto the table. "That girl is a half-blood." He shouldn't have interfered. It's an insult to the town. Others nodded, some more cautious, fearful of directly confronting a man known for his skill with both horse and rifle. Yet the shared sentiment was clear. The rancher had challenged their authority, and that could not be tolerated. The talk quickly turned to plans of retaliation. Ideas ranged from subtle intimidation blocking his access to the town's supplies, whisper campaigns, and threats to more violent measures. The tension was palpable. Anger mixed with fear of the man's reputation, resulting in a restless and dangerous energy. Their hatred was fueled not only by pride and prejudice, but by the belief that they had been publicly humiliated. They wanted to restore the town's sense of control, and the girl, in their eyes, was the spark that needed to be extinguished. Meanwhile, at the ranch, the rancher sensed a change in the wind before any threats arrived at his doorstep. He rode out each day to check his cattle, listening for signs of disturbance along the trails, watching the edges of the horizon with an alertness born of experience. He knew that townsfolk resentment could fester and erupt quickly, especially when mixed with prejudice. He prepared his home and land accordingly, securing doors, reinforcing boundaries, and storing provisions. Every precaution was a silent message to the girl. While danger existed beyond their sanctuary, he would shield her from it. The girl, observing the rancher's cautious vigilance, began to grasp the stakes. Her relief at being rescued was tempered by the realization that the town would not simply let go. The hostility she had long experienced was not gone, it had merely shifted focus. She noticed the way he would pause mid-task, scanning the trails, the way he kept a rifle within reach, the subtle tension in his jaw when he spoke of town interactions. Slowly, she began to understand that safety was not a given, even here, and that trust required courage as well as patience. As the days passed, the girl's connection with the rancher deepened. He taught her small lessons about the land, which plants were safe to eat, how to track animals, and the rhythm of the weather. In these moments, the shadow of the town's enmity felt distant, yet never fully absent. The rancher spoke to her often about vigilance and self-respect, emphasizing that their protection was not just about avoiding danger, but about living boldly in the face of fear. These lessons were both practical and symbolic, a way to empower her to stand strong even as threats loomed. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned to shades of fire and violet, the rancher spoke quietly. "They might come. The town doesn't like what I've done, but we're ready and we're together. You need to know this. No matter what they try, I won't let anyone hurt you." The girl listened, her small hands gripping his sleeve. For the first time, she felt a mix of fear and strength, a realization that while danger existed, so too did protection and loyalty. This chapter of the story establishes rising tension and impending conflict. The town's anger and prejudice are forces that cannot be ignored, setting up the stakes for confrontation and testing the bond between the rancher and the girl. The threat of retribution casts a looming shadow over their fragile sanctuary, reminding the reader that safety and trust are earned through courage, preparation, and vigilance. The rancher knew that remaining in plain sight was no longer safe. Even with his reputation and skills, the persistent anger of the townsfolk could turn deadly if they discovered the girl's whereabouts. So he led her further into his land, past familiar trails and hidden hollows, to a secluded area few had ever seen. Nestled against a natural ridge, with thick brush providing cover and a small stream offering fresh water, it became their hidden sanctuary, a place where the girl could heal and begin to reclaim a sense of safety. The first days in the sanctuary were quiet, almost painfully so. The girl, wary and mistrustful, kept to herself, exploring the dense vegetation cautiously. She tested the boundaries, stepping softly over the mossy ground, peering through clusters of trees to see if anyone was watching. The rancher allowed her space, understanding that trust was fragile and could not be forced. Yet, he also remained close enough to intervene if danger appeared, a silent guardian in the shadows. Their routine began to take shape. Mornings were spent gathering water from the stream, learning which berries and roots were safe to eat, and observing the movements of the animals that shared the land. Afternoons were quieter. The girl practiced tracking small creatures, sharpening her awareness, while the rancher worked on reinforcing their temporary shelter with wood and brush, making it nearly invisible from a distance. Evenings were for warmth and conversation, sitting by a small fire, the crackle of flames mixing with the gentle rush of the stream. The girl slowly began to emerge from her shell. She learned to trust that the rancher would not abandon her, that his protection was steady and unwavering. She began to speak more openly, sharing stories of her childhood, her mother, and the constant prejudice she had endured. The rancher listened, never interrupting, validating her experiences with small gestures, nodding, offering quiet words of encouragement, or simply sitting in understanding silence. With each shared story, her fear diminished slightly, replaced by a fragile confidence. The sanctuary also became a place of learning. The rancher taught her practical skills that were essential for survival on the frontier: how to track animals without startling them, how to make a fire without smoke to reveal their location, how to move quietly through the brush. Each lesson was imbued with subtle teachings about courage and self-reliance. The girl realized that knowledge could be as powerful a shield as the rancher's presence, giving her agency in a world that had long sought to deny it. Even in this hidden refuge, the threat of the town lingered. Occasionally, they would hear distant shouts or the clatter of boots, reminders that the world outside remained hostile. The rancher would check the perimeter, scanning the horizon and listening for any sign of approach. Each time he returned with reassurance, reinforcing the girl's sense of safety without dismissing the reality of danger. In these moments, she learned that fear could coexist with security, and that vigilance was a form of empowerment rather than mere anxiety. Over time, a deeper bond formed between them. It was not a bond born of words alone, but of shared experiences and mutual reliance. The rancher began to see the girl not just as someone to protect, but as a resilient individual with courage and intelligence, someone whose spirit could endure and even flourish under the right guidance. The girl, in turn, recognized the rancher's steadfast integrity and quiet strength, understanding that she had found someone who truly cared for her well-being, untainted by the cruelty she had known all her life. The hidden sanctuary, with its sheltering trees, rushing stream, and protective guardian, became more than a physical space. It was a psychological and emotional refuge, where the girl could rebuild her trust in humanity and reclaim her sense of self. Here, she discovered that she could be both cautious and brave, vulnerable yet resilient. And though the outside world remained threatening, within this secluded haven, hope began to take root. This chapter underscores the theme of sanctuary and emotional healing, showing how the rancher's foresight and care allow the girl to regain confidence and agency. It prepares the narrative for the inevitable confrontation with the townsfolk while highlighting the transformative power of trust, protection, and human connection. Days passed in relative peace, the hidden sanctuary offering the girl safety and the rancher the comfort of knowing she was out of immediate danger. But the simmering resentment of the townsfolk did not disappear, it only grew, fueled by pride, prejudice, and a bruised sense of authority. Rumors spread faster than wildfire. The girl had been rescued, the man who protected her defied the town, and neither had shown fear. This was a challenge the townsfolk could not ignore. One hot afternoon, as the girl practiced tracking small animals along the edge of the trees, the rancher spotted movement in the distance. A small group of men, led by a particularly obstinate townsperson, were making their way toward the sanctuary. They moved with purpose, weapons slung over shoulders, their expressions a mix of anger and determination. The rancher's jaw tightened. He had anticipated this, but seeing it unfold still sent a ripple of tension through him. He guided the girl back to the safety of their hidden shelter, keeping his movements calm to avoid alarming her. Once inside, he quickly checked their makeshift defenses, the thick brush surrounding the clearing, the narrow paths that could be easily blocked or defended, and the vantage points from which he could see the intruders approach. Each precaution was deliberate, a silent promise that he would not let harm come to her. The townsfolk arrived at the outer edge of the clearing, their leader stepping forward with a mix of bravado and desperation. "We've come for the girl," he declared loudly, his voice carrying over the rustle of the trees. "You have no right to keep her. She belongs to the town." The rancher stood tall, his silhouette steady against the sunlight filtering through the leaves. "She belongs to no one but herself," he replied calmly, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "I won't allow you to harm her." A tense standoff ensued. The men shifted uneasily, unsure how to confront a man known for his skill with both weapons and strategy. Some attempted intimidation, brandishing rifles and shouting threats, but the rancher's presence, combined with the natural defensiveness of the terrain, held them at bay. The girl watched from behind him, her heart pounding, but also with a new sense of trust. She saw how he remained calm, protective, and unwavering, and she realized that courage could be quiet, yet utterly commanding. The conversation escalated, each side testing the other, but the rancher did not waver. He spoke of justice, compassion, and the immorality of punishing someone for who they were rather than what they had done. The townsfolk's anger wavered slightly as they recognized that their threats could not compel him to surrender the girl. It was a moment of moral reckoning, the raw prejudice of the town confronted by the unyielding integrity of a man who chose to act rightly, regardless of danger. Finally, after what felt like hours but was likely mere minutes, the intruders began to retreat. They realized that intimidation and force would not prevail against a man willing to defend the helpless, and that the girl's safety was secured not by fear, but by courage and principle. The leader spat to the ground in frustration, muttering warnings, but the outcome was clear. The rancher had won this confrontation without violence, relying instead on presence, strategy, and moral authority. After the townsfolk departed, the rancher turned to the girl, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They won't be able to get to you, not while I'm here," he said. She nodded, still shaken but feeling an undeniable sense of relief. For the first time, she saw that strength did not always come from brute force. It could also come from steadfastness, intelligence, and unwavering moral courage. This confrontation marked a turning point in the story. It reinforced the rancher's role as protector and mentor, solidified the girl's growing trust, and illustrated the tension between human prejudice and moral integrity. The town's hostility remained, but their failure to break the bond between protector and protected hinted at the triumph of courage and compassion over hatred and fear. The days following the confrontation passed with a quiet intensity, a mixture of relief, reflection, and subtle transformation. The girl, once timid and wary of every glance or whisper, began to feel the first true stirrings of belonging. At the ranch, life had a rhythm, a balance between work and reflection, danger and safety. Here, under the steady guidance of the rancher, she discovered that the world could hold kindness as well as cruelty, and that her existence could be meaningful beyond the narrow judgment of the town. The mornings were spent with practical tasks, tending to the small garden near the cabin, fetching water, and helping with the care of livestock. At first, the girl approached these duties cautiously, fearful of making mistakes. But the rancher's patience and encouragement transformed her apprehension into confidence. "Mistakes happen," he told her one morning as she spilled water while filling a bucket. "What matters is that you learn and that you keep going." His words, simple as they were, carried the weight of experience and compassion, and the girl began to internalize them. Each task completed became a small victory, each day a step toward independence. Beyond the chores, the rancher shared knowledge of the land, teaching her how to read the weather and the clouds, track animals, and understand the rhythms of the wilderness. These lessons went beyond survival. They instilled a sense of mastery and self-reliance, helping her reclaim confidence that had long been eroded by prejudice and fear. Slowly, she learned to trust her own judgment, understanding that she could navigate the world not as a victim, but as someone capable and resourceful. Evenings were quieter, spent by the fire, sharing stories, observing the stars, or simply sitting in companionable silence. The girl began to speak more openly, recounting memories of her mother, tales from her early childhood and her deepest fears. The rancher listened with patience, never judging, never rushing her. In these moments, she realized that she could be seen and heard, that her experiences mattered. This acknowledgement nurtured her sense of self-worth, something she had rarely felt among the townsfolk who had dismissed her as half-blood. As the weeks passed, the girl's presence began to feel natural, even indispensable, to the rhythm of the ranch. She developed small rituals, feeding the chickens at dawn, collecting firewood, tending to the garden. Each routine reinforced a sense of place and purpose. The rancher, in turn, recognized her growth, her courage, and her resilience, treating her not merely as someone to protect, but as an individual whose skills and insight enriched the life they shared. Their relationship deepened, founded on mutual respect, trust, and the quiet bond formed through shared hardship. The girl also began to notice subtle changes within herself. She smiled more easily, laughed softly when the rancher told a dry, wry joke, and even began to plan small projects for the ranch. Where once she had felt isolated and powerless, she now experienced the simple joy of contributing, of being valued. She began to understand that home was not a single place, nor a status granted by birth, but something cultivated through care, connection, and trust. Outside the sanctuary, the world remained hostile, but its presence no longer overshadowed her daily life. Encounters with the distant town became opportunities to observe and learn rather than threats to survival. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, understanding that she was not defined by the prejudice of others. Within the walls of the ranch, in the rhythm of chores, lessons, and evenings by the fire, she had found acceptance and belonging. By the end of this period, the girl had transformed from a frightened, isolated child into a young person who knew she could survive, thrive, and even find joy in a world that had once sought to crush her. The rancher's steadfast guidance and protection had given her not just safety, but identity, purpose, and hope. She was no longer merely the girl the town had scorned. She was someone who mattered, someone whose life had meaning, and someone whose courage and resilience would shape the days to come. This chapter underscores the themes of growth, empowerment, and the creation of a safe, nurturing environment. It sets the stage for the story's emotional climax, showing how protection, trust, and compassion can transform lives even in the harshest of circumstances. The sun had just begun its slow descent, painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson, when the rancher led the girl to a quiet spot overlooking the wide open plains. The air was still, filled with the soft hum of insects and the distant lowing of cattle. It was a peaceful moment, yet the weight of what had transpired, the cruelty of the townsfolk, the terror of her capture, the months of hidden refuge hung quietly between them. The girl, now stronger and more confident than the frightened child who had first hung from the tree, stood beside the rancher, her hands folded nervously, eyes wide with anticipation. The rancher turned to her, his expression serious but gentle. He had always protected her through actions, through vigilance, guidance, and unwavering presence, but this moment required words, a clear declaration that could not be misunderstood. "You've been through more than anyone should ever endure," he began, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of his own experiences and the certainty of his intentions. "And through it all, you've shown courage I've rarely seen. You've survived, learned, and grown despite the hatred of others." The girl looked down at her hands, the scars and calluses of survival evident. She felt the rancher's steady gaze on her, and a strange mixture of humility and pride stirred within her. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, not with recognition of her strength, not with respect for her resilience. He knelt slightly to meet her at eye level, a gesture of both protection and connection. "From this day forward, I want you to know something clearly," he continued. "No one has the right to harm you. No one can claim you or decide your worth. You belong to yourself, and from now on, under my watch, you are safe." His hands rested lightly on her shoulders, a tangible assurance that his words were not empty. The girl's lips trembled, and for a moment she could not speak. Emotion she had long suppressed, fear, grief, relief, and a flicker of hope swirled within her. The rancher's gaze softened. "And I want you to understand this as well," he said quietly, his tone firm yet tender. "I am not just protecting you because I must. I am choosing to. You are mine to care for, to defend, and to ensure no harm comes to you. That is my promise." The girl's eyes widened, a mixture of awe and disbelief crossing her features. She had never been claimed in such a way, not in ownership, but in protection and devotion. The words resonated with a sense of permanence and security she had never known. Her life, once defined by the cruelty and rejection of the town, now had a foundation built on care, safety, and unwavering loyalty. Slowly, she reached out, placing her hands over his, feeling the steady warmth and reassurance of his presence. "Thank you," she whispered, voice fragile but filled with newfound strength. I feel safe." Her words, simple yet profound, reflected the emotional journey she had undergone from terror and isolation to trust and belonging. The rancher gave a small, reassuring nod. "That's because you are safe, and you always will be as long as I'm here. You are no longer alone. You are seen, you are protected, and you are valued." His voice, firm and full of conviction, sealed the promise he had kept every day since their first meeting at the tree. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in deep hues of amber and purple, the girl felt a sense of completion, of finally belonging to a world that had once rejected her. The bond between her and the rancher was not merely one of survival. It was a bond of trust, loyalty, and a quiet, enduring love that promised safety and acceptance. In that moment, the story reached its emotional pinnacle. A young girl, once victimized and vulnerable, now stood secure, protected, and cherished, her spirit restored by courage, compassion, and the unwavering dedication of the man who had called her mine. This final chapter serves as both resolution and affirmation, highlighting the triumph of human compassion over cruelty, trust over fear, and love and protection over prejudice. It closes the arc of the girl's journey from isolation and vulnerability to acceptance, belonging, and empowerment, while underscoring the transformative power of empathy and courage.